Hold up a minute, Rich. I got to say something.
You're not satisfied with what I'm doing?
You're doing good. You're doing a fine job. I want to, at this time, there's some special people out here that I forgot to mention a while ago. I want all the past recipients of the Fort Proctor Memorial Cowman's Award of Honor that are here tonight to please stand up. Let me see who all's here.
Well, there's
Giles Lee.
There's Grove. Giles
Bill
Lee.
Kraft.
J.D.
Helen
Croft.
Groves. Buster Welch. Ted Gray. John Robert Scott. James Dyer. I'm sorry? Helen Groves. Yeah, she's over here. Yeah. Bill Kraft, back in the back. Anybody else? Thank y'all all for coming. This is what makes it great, to have y'all come back every year. We really appreciate that. You can have it back. And I forgot him too.
Thank you, Pat. Well, the next awardee is an old boy from Borden County. Barbara and I moved there in 1952, and so I've known the Miller family almost ever since we moved there. I know that one night we went to a dance over at Gale, and this woman that I'd never seen in my life kept staring at me and kind of made me uncomfortable. I didn't know what it was, and so finally she said, I want to tell you that you look so much like my son, I'm just fascinated. And it was Mrs. Frank Miller, Ralph's uncle. And I took it as an honor because old Frank was a good-looking feller. I didn't know that I qualified, but anyway, I knew Ralph's father and uncle, and they were hellacious cowboys and cowmen. I never did go up and help them work while I've lived in Borden County, but I had a friend, Alb Stokes, that was a good personal friend of all the Millers, and he used to go up there and help them work. And they might be working cattle, and they just stop in the middle of nowhere, and I never knew and never found out where these bucking horses came from, but they just decided to stop work and let these boys, Ralph and Riley and Rich, ride these bucking horses. And I think they always had some extra boys there that, and they'd just, you know, ride these bucking horses. And incidentally, well, Rich Miller, now this is what Alb told me, and Rich made an artist and lived most of his life overseas, and he was a good artist. Fact about it, the whole Miller family is very talented. But anyway, he told me that, and I don't know whether this is true, Ralph, or not, but he said Rich was the best bronc rider of all of you. Is that true? Well, so anyway, one time this Alb Stokes had a ranch lease there that we happen to own now, but we were all working, helping old Alb over there, and Alb's cattle were gentle. He branded twice a year, and he'd wean twice a year, and had just one set of pens right in the middle of the ranch. And when we weaned those calves, we'd drive them to the house, which was about 4 miles. Now that first mile and a half was a son of a gun. I mean, it was a runaway, but you ran them for about 1.5 miles, and from then on you could drive them to the house. And he'd put them up in a pen, and just they could hardly lay down in. And then the next day he'd come back, and we'd take them to water and graze them back to the pens. And he did that for 3 days. After that, you could drive them anywhere, and they were plumb gentle. Well, we were penning these old cows, and they're just gentle as they could be. But Ralph's daddy was with us, Mr. Clyde. And we was all up there to the pen, just pushing them on in there. And Ralph, I can't think of that Hispanic fellow that worked for y'all for so many years. What was his name? Bucky, yeah. And so we just ride along there, and finally old Ralph and Clyde in a great loud voice, God damn it, Potty, get your rope down and try to look like a cowboy anyway. You never saw so many cowboys start grabbing their ropes and doing something in all your life. No. But they were, you know, if a cow ran off out of their herd, they just forfeit her until she finally decided that's the wrong thing to do and bring her back. So Ralph had some good teaching as far as working cattle and everything, and they involved in a lot of things. Ralph told me a story one time. He said they were working cattle. They had an old kid working for them, and wasn't much of a bronc rider or anything, but they started out one morning and somebody got a hold of some formaldehyde, and they rode up behind his horse and just poured it on his tail. Well, of course, it went to burning, and that old pony went to bucking and threw that old kid off. Well, everybody had a great laugh about that. You know, you always like to see something like that. So, anyway, then later on in the week, they're still working cattle, and they thought that was funny, so they tried it again. So they rode up there and poured that formaldehyde on that old horse's tail, and that old boy just bailed off. And they said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, last time he smelled like that, he bucked my ass off." So, I have one more story, and I'm probably taking a little liberty of telling this, Ralph, but it's a very poignant story. It's always impressed me. They used to, and Riley, his brother, and I guess Ralph and Clyde, they had dogs, and they used to run coyotes and bobcats, and even Riley has caught some mountain lions up there around that Caprock. But anyway, Clyde was pretty old, and his wife had died. Ralph's mother had died, and so they decided, Mr. Clyde was, you know, pretty blue. They decided to go run some coyotes or something, and so they got out there and got all saddled up and ready to go, and Clyde said, "Boys, I don't feel too good." Said, "I believe I better lay down just a minute." So had his leggings on, boots and spurs and everything. They went to the house, and he laid down there on the bed, and they just sitting there visiting with him, and all of a sudden Clyde said, "Well, boys, so long." And he died right there with his spurs on, right there on that bed. Well, when we buried Clyde, one of the few times in Borden County it had snowed. And it had snowed, and it had snowed, and it was wet. And the cemetery from the ranch there, the best I remember it, Ralph hadn't been there in a long time, kind of up on a little side of a hill there. Well, we started up there, and Clyde's old horse was right outside the fence. And he ran around that fence. He followed all the way around there. And while the service was going on, that old horse stood right there on the fence, right the other side of the cemetery. And when it was over, they began to lower Clyde's casket into the grave and had saddle on top of the casket there. That old horse, he nickered and he wheeled and he left there with his tail over his back and just ran as fast as he could. And I thought that was just a real tribute to, I mean, that horse knew what was going on. And I had a four-wheel vehicle. I spent the next hour and a half pulling people off of that hill there because it was wet. Their vehicles just sank in the ground there. Well, they've been good neighbors. I served on the school board there for several years there in Borden County, and just before I left, well, Ralph was elected to the school board, and so I noticed that, you know, they put a tablet there and pencil and one thing there so you can take notes and one thing. I noticed old Ralph was real busy over there. And I thought, my God, he's really taking charge here. He's going to find out. Well, we had a little break there, and I walked by there and happened to glance down. You have never seen such fancy doodles in all your life. And I think that you should have kept those, Dewey, because they were something else again. And you know, this brings up your daddy, Dewey Everett was a good friend of mine. Dewey Faye's father, and he did a lot of work there on the ranch for us. He had heavy machinery, but he had a ranch that joined us there. And Dewey was a big Democrat. And of course, I was just as big a Republican. And we never really had any problem. But Dewey had a little dog, and he had a vest made for him, put on there, said, "Yellow Dog Democrat." And he had him on a leash, and he'd walk him around Gale there. But then, you know, he also had a pet rooster. And we'd stop and visit over there, and old Dewey, he'd put that rooster out, and while we were visiting, that rooster, and he rode with him in that pickup all the time. And one time I got a letter from Dewey, and he was complimenting me. And I thought, you know, this is kind of a funny letter from Dewey, because he's a pretty crusty old individual. And he was, you know, kind of complimenting me, and one thing and the other. And finally, down at the bottom, and it's written on a tablet with pencil. And down at the bottom, he said, "Damn it, I just wanted to tell you that I voted for you." Well, we had a great time. It's a great family.